Thanks, Cass. And so, yeah, I was saying I should have given this talk yesterday, so now I could be like, I told you guys so. I get one more show of hands. Who owns a CryptoKitty? Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so the one thing, is I'm gonna ask to hold questions to the end. I'm gonna stick around and hang out and drink beers and we could talk, but I just want to get through this because there's a lot of content, and so if you could just please hold the questions and then we'll get to it. So if this works, okay, I'll just do it's here. Okay, so I want to start this presentation off by remembering Aaron Swartz. This past Thursday marks the 5-year anniversary of Aaron's suicide. So Aaron was an internet activist. He was a friend of Thoughtworks, and he was charged by federal prosecutors with 2 counts of wire fraud and 11 violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It carried a cumulative maximum penalty of $1 million in fines and 35 years in prison. This event space is actually the Aaron Swartz Memorial Gallery. And you know, I want to remember Aaron because you know, we still have a lot of work to do to build, you know, the society that we all want to build. And so, you know, I think it's just important to remember, you know, all of those that kind of work to build that society. So quickly about Thoughtworks, and I don't mean to be too dramatic, but Thoughtworks is definitely a unique company in the kind of history of corporations. Thoughtworks challenges its people and its communities to think critically about the world and to challenge the status quo. I like this quote from Roy, the founder of Thoughtworks, regarding technically superior infrastructures. From my perspective, this sort of ethos draws a lot of people into the blockchain ecosystem, and I hope that, you know, this talk will kind of explain some of that. So I know this is a tech talk. This is a tech series. I'm going to disappoint those of you that are looking for like a hardcore tech talk. Usually in these blockchain talks, the audiences are kind of mixed in terms of expertise, knowledge of the space, knowledge of technology even. And if you've been to my talks before, you know that I'm kind of like a big believer in context. And so I apologize if this talk is more context than tech, but I hope that by spending time contextualizing the technology, it'll make it more approachable. So with that, you know, we can talk about the first B, Bitcoin. A quick preamble. The 2 major criticisms you'll hear about Bitcoin is that it's a bubble and that it has no intrinsic value. Yes, it's a bubble. This is the I told you so part. And I had this done yesterday. I didn't change this. And no, it has no intrinsic value. The third point about this talk is it's not about investment advice. I don't care to be attributed to gains or losses in your portfolio. The first 2 points have asterisks, which I'll get to. The third point is unconditional. So kicking it off with a little bit of history. You know, to meaningfully understand this technology deeply and to engage with it requires a little bit of understanding of context. And I'm not going to go into a deep history of the founding fathers of the United States of America. But this is a financial technology. And I think to understand the, you know, modern kind of financial system that's emerging on top of these technologies, it's useful to understand the origins of like what we call the legacy financial infrastructure. And then armed with that understanding, you can juxtapose, you know, the existing system with the potentials of a new system and maybe kind of like pick out the good things of either of those 2 systems and try and combine something that is, you know, better than, you know, each of those things individually. So yeah, I mean, more or less the history of the modern banking system starts with Alexander Hamilton and the Federalist Papers. He consolidated wartime debts into a unified federal banking system, and the United States built its reputation as a nation by paying back its debts globally. I'll leave you, the audience, to follow the trail and kind of do the history lessons if it's of interest to you, but we're going to jump way forward in history. And where we land is the late 1980s. And it is a time where commercial cryptography is considered a munition, and the export of cryptography is banned by the United States government. So one of the things about this technology and about cryptography that underpins the technology is that it is rooted in a belief of individuals' right to liberty, right? So if that's a topic you're not very interested in, which is like cool if it's not interesting to you, people come from different contexts, the technology might not excite you as much. But the early innovators in the field of cryptography definitely had a point of view. They had a point of view that, you know, we as cypherpunks, these guys in the 80s, had to be the ones on the vanguard to protect an individual's right to liberty and privacy, because the corporations and the governments and the institutions aren't going to provide it to them. And so in the 1980s on Usenet, you know, there were discussions about anonymity, there were discussions about reputation, privacy, government monitoring, corporate control of information, and so on. But in the 1980s, these discussions were like flame wars on small internet kind of Usenets that it was really like kind of hypothetical. There wasn't a lot of traction. There wasn't a commercial internet yet. So the stakes were lower in a way, but these cypherpunks were kind of projecting of what could be. And so, you know, being the punks that they were writing code. So Bitcoin's hello world moment comes in the midst of the Great Recession in 2009. Again, Bitcoin is a financial technology. It has the word coin in it. It is unequivocally about finance. And in Bitcoin's Genesis block, there's this kind of political statement, right? Chancellor on the brink of second bailouts for banks. And like my point of this very not to scale history lesson is that technology doesn't live in a vacuum, right? In the midst of all of our current context, right, we're still asking ourselves these questions. Still asking the questions that the cypherpunks were asking in the 1980s, and even, you know, the founding fathers were asking when they were drafting the Constitution. And what was once kind of a question of intellectual curiosity has now turned into, you know, tech platforms of massive, massive scale. So we're talking about the minds of billions of people being influenced by technology, media, corporations, and, you know, banks as well. And at this kind of moment in history, it feels like a bit of a crescendo with everything that's happening around us. And so, yeah, I think like the reason the cypherpunks believed in the individual liberty, it goes back to what Eric Hughes says. The less the individual is able to have a voice, the more our narratives will be dictated for us, right? And so I think if there's like one call to action that I have from this tech talk for you, the audience, is learn about public key cryptography. Learn how to use it, equip yourself with the knowledge of how it works. You know, maybe even arm yourself with that knowledge, but, you know, okay, so thank you, Igor, for the history lesson. So what? Like, what about Bitcoin, right? What does Bitcoin actually do? So fundamentally, Bitcoin solves this old computer science problem called the Byzantine generals problem. And if you were in the Bitcoin scene in kind of like 2000, 2011, 2012, we would talk about this Byzantine generals problem way more often than we do now. It's kind of been relegated to the, the past history of blockchain technology. Oh, by the way, if you don't follow Naval on Twitter, you definitely should. He's like one of the best voices in this ecosystem, and he articulates this way better than I was ever able to. So I'm just gonna kind of copy him and read the quote. So blockchain technology allows groups of humans who are anonymous and don't know each other to establish trust with each other. In human history, we've had a few ways to kind of coordinate or regulate large groups of humans, right? We've done that through democracy or monarchy or corporations. And now we've added a new way, right? So groups of people can achieve consensus with each other on the internet, even though they don't know each other, and like that solution to that Byzantine generals problem is what blockchain and Bitcoin is all about, and it enables us to imagine how we can re-architect systems such that that centralized institution that we have historically relied upon can go away, and we can kind of disintermediate that into a kind of peer-to-peer architecture. So yeah, by solving this problem, we lower the barriers of entry to decentralized markets everywhere. Okay, so I said there would be some technology, so I'll quickly go through the technology of Bitcoin. And most of this is going to come straight from the Bitcoin white paper, which you've all read. And if you haven't, it's like a piece of art. It's fantastic. So one of the things that underpins a lot of computer science, not just blockchain technology, is this concept of hashing. So a hash is essentially a fingerprint for data, and it uniquely identifies that data. So this is hashing with emojis. So you have this kitten, and you hash it, and you get a bow tie. So when you hash, so hashes can take any type of data, and they can give you a unique fingerprint for that data. Interesting thing about hashing is it's one way, right? So if you have the data and you compute the hash, if you have the data, you can compute the hash. But if you just have the hash, you can't generate the data. It's a lossy kind of algorithm. So that's hashing. So what is a coin? When we talk about coins and these things, it's actually not that interesting. A coin is just a chain of digital signatures. So each owner kind of transfers their coin to the next owner by digitally signing a hash of the previous transaction with the public key of the next recipient. And a payee can verify that the chain of ownership is legitimate, using this hashing and the cryptography. That's all coins are. When we talk about Bitcoins, it's not, when you see the articles and there's like these metal coins, no, that's not a thing. This is supposed to say technology 3, but so you can do this kind of, you can use these digital signature trails using a central server, and you can kind of like aggregate all of the transactions out there, and you can put them into, a block of transactions. And this is kind of like what Bitcoin does. Bitcoin is really a timestamp server. It's a bad timestamp server, but essentially Bitcoin measures approximately the time between 10 minutes, give or take a few minutes on average. But that's all it's doing. It's like coalescing all of these transactions into blocks and hashing the whole thing, and then just creating a history of all the blocks as time progresses. So you can do this in a centralized manner. You might call this a bank. It's a weird architecture for a bank, but you can kind of use the central administrator to do that. The thing that makes it peer-to-peer is this concept of proof of work. Proof of work is one of these things that takes people time to understand. It is the fundamental thing that solves for the Byzantine generals problem. It is not intuitive. It has like a lot of game theoretical properties to it. But essentially, what you're doing is racing everyone else to solve a puzzle. And when you solve the puzzle, you can produce the result and say, guys, check it out. I produced the result. Stop solving this puzzle. Go solve the next puzzle. And then it gets, the more people that kind of join this puzzle solving game, the harder the mechanics get through a difficulty adjustment mechanism. But again, it's all in the white paper. And I think it took me like 8 times reading the white paper before I kind of grokked it. So if you don't get it on the first time, that's kind of by design because this technology is from Mars. So again, the proof of work is what takes you from a centralized infrastructure to a peer-to-peer infrastructure. The proof of work is what solves for that Byzantine generals problem. And it's like really hard to explain concisely, and so that's kind of why I'm brushing over it, and I apologize. If you want me to kind of go into the details, I'll point you to Mike Golden over here, who can explain it to you all the way. And so like a recap of what happens in Bitcoin, right? So new transactions are broadcast to every single node. Each node collects new transactions into a block. Each node works on finding the proof of work for the block. This is the cute part of Satoshi, and this is like the one flaw of the white paper is he says like each node. In today's world, each node means like Chinese ASIC miners, right? If you've learned about mining for Bitcoin, the ASICs are doing it, not every node. But when you hear people talk about decentralization and decentralized maximalism or whatever, it's because in the white paper it assumes that everyone on the network is running proof of work. Like mining is decentralized, but Satoshi kind of naively, I don't know, maybe on purpose, but didn't foresee ASICs. And so yeah, when like the first node that finds the proof of work solution just says like, hey guys, I found it. And nodes accept the block if it's valid. And then nodes express their acceptance of the block by just working on the next block. It's like, okay, there's no point in me trying to resolve a solved problem. I'm going to move on, get the next batch of transactions that have happened in this next 10-minute time period and try to solve for that block. And that's like what Bitcoin is. That's what Bitcoin does. It's a time server that produces timestamps every 10 minutes. And as a part of producing timestamps, it kind of bundles transactions together into these things called blocks. And again, happy to like spend all night talking over beers about this because that's what we do. Okay, so enter the blockchain. So the word blockchain's never actually mentioned in the Bitcoin white paper. Mike Golden, he told me last night there is a C++ header file called blockchain.h, which is where the word blockchain comes from. So technologists like to abstract things out, right? So, here's Bitcoin, here's this mechanism, this proof of work, this peer-to-peer system. That's cool, but what else can we do? For the first time ever, we have created a peer-to-peer, trustless, resilient, immutable, globally connected source of truth. Let's start experimenting. And so, being, I guess, one of these like blockchain OGs in a way, all these like new crypto traders that think like there's a ton of tokens and this is like all brand new, like this has actually happened before, right? So from 2011 to 2015, there's a massive explosion of altcoins that are traded, that are doing launches, they're pre-mines. There's this really cool website, mapofcoins.com/Bitcoin. You can check it out, and it shows really the history. So this is like Namecoin, this is Litecoin. Satoshi, Charlie Lee sold all his Litecoin down there. So November, from 1 year later, it's like, boom, even more cryptos. And then by August 2015, like there would be like 6 screens of this thing. Like if you go to the website, it's like, it's amazing. And so it's this like massive explosion of experimentation, right? I know I said no investment advice, but like part of the reason I say no investment advice is because people were investing in these things, and these things don't exist anymore, right? They like all collapsed because new technology. It's very Darwinian landscape, right? Bitcoin is version what, like 0.13 or something? Like there is no version 1.0 of any of this technology. It's all an experiment. And so like, maybe Litecoin exists. Doge is doing well. Okay, and then so full disclosure, I work for a company called ConsenSys. ConsenSys' founder co-founded a project called Ethereum, so obviously I'm biased. But one of the things that the founders of Ethereum kind of realized is that this stuff is going on, and for each one of these things, the project has to bootstrap its own network, it has to bootstrap their own mining nodes, it has to bootstrap its own wallet infrastructure. It has to gain adoption. Could you imagine like installing a wallet for each one of these? Like, it doesn't work. And so they, being technologists, like let's abstract things out. Let's generalize things. And so they introduced this concept of programmable blockchains. When you see smart contract, it's the ability to program the blockchain, right? So the main kind of novelty that Ethereum introduced is there is the blockchain mechanism, the proof of work, the peer-to-peer transactions, and then there's a layer on top that lets you write applications. It lets you write code and lets you program the blockchain to do the cool and innovative things that you want it to do. And so the reason this is important is all of a sudden as an application developer, you don't have to bootstrap a new network. You have users on a platform. You just have to build a superior application. And so, like I say exponential. If you run any like reasonable production network and you see 1.5 or 1.25 million transactions per day, you're like, okay, you guys are like school kids. But nevertheless, like Ethereum as a platform is far, far outpacing, like Bitcoin as a transaction platform. Developers are coming to programmable blockchains, and Ethereum is not the only one, but this idea that you don't have to do all the grunt work of re-bootstrapping just to test your idea out there is appealing to developers because it reduces your time to market. One of the things that emerges when you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time is this concept of standards, right? This is an interface for the ERC20 token standard. ERC20, if you pay attention to Ethereum, it is the standard that has introduced the notion of a token, right? So, and this is pretty cool. There's the ERCs, the improvement proposals, et cetera, like they keep evolving, they keep growing. I think there's a new proposal, 777, which is trying to be like a more superior, backwards compatible ERC20, right? So even in the standards world, these things are evolving. And the reason standards are important is because once you have a standard, you can do things like this. And try not to like pay attention at the ridiculous amounts of money that these things have, but you're able to kind of on the same platform build your project and have it be able to use the same infrastructure, the same wallet infrastructure, the same exchange infrastructure as everything else before it. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is not my picture. The source got cut out. I'm sorry. I can, if you guys want it, I can dig up the source. But this is as of November 30th of 2017. And so, you know, like this massive kind of explosion. And again, Darwinian ecosystem, right? Like these things are going, like many of these things are going to fail because that's like the pace of innovation is so fast and people are building new superior systems all the time that you know, everyone is trying to understand this ecosystem, and it's a pretty well funded ecosystem. But then, you know, like we get to the third B, which is bubbles. And I have nothing to do with today's market conditions. But you know, go back to the first asterisk, like, yes, it's a bubble, right? And today's a pretty bad day for the crypto markets. Yeah, not going there. So, like, in my opinion, most of like the investment in cryptocurrencies today is kind of like speculation on the future utility of the technology, right? It's like you see a project, you think it's cool, you invest in it now because you think in the future it will have utility. And so that's kind of like a speculative kind of way to invest. It's a little weird, maybe. The problem with kind of just dismissing this this whole ecosystem outright by saying it's a bubble is, like, frankly, we live in a bubble economy, right? You know, since the Great Recession, and again, context, right? Like, everything is connected. Since the Great Recession, the money supply has expanded dramatically. There's a lot more money out there. Actually, while I was researching, the last time there was kind of like this bubble in the oil market, or in the 70s when there was the oil crisis, there was bubble with commodity pricing of oil. So the Fed increased interest rates to 14%, right? Like the idea of like a 14% interest rate in like this modern context is just like, it's unfathomable, right? So like our economy is a bubble economy. If you have any snap shares, I don't know what to say. And there's this really interesting kind of research from these guys, Preston Teeter and Jorgen Sandberg, and they argue that market speculation is driven by culturally situated narratives that are deeply embedded and supported by the prevailing institutions of the time, right? Now think about the institutions of our time, right? Think about our governments and our banks and our, you know, organizations that tell us that everything's okay. And, you know, it's like, it's this thing that I don't understand because I'm, you know, just a technologist, but in our modern kind of post-Great Recession fake news era, I think we're like deeply questioning our institutions. And I think it's interesting to consider the implications of that lack of faith in institutions and how like this market is investing in these things. And you know, some people see Bitcoin as a hedge against you know, the kind of legacy infrastructure. So the second thing is that it has no intrinsic value, and this is a picture of Warren Buffett, who still uses a flip phone. You know, God bless Warren Buffett, he's amazing. And yeah, Bitcoin has no intrinsic value if you compare it to a traditional asset class, right? But the Bitcoin network produces this many hashes, SHA-256 hashes per second. Every single second, this many hashes are occurring. By every single metric that we have, that the whole ecosystem has, except for today's market price, adoption of this new decentralized architecture is increasing. a parallel financial system is currently emerging with open, permissionless access for all, rooted in an individual's ability to maintain ownership of their own assets, right? We've never had anything like this before in the history of humanity. And so, you know, part of this is like, don't underestimate the importance of censorship resistance, right? The inability of a third party to veto a transaction between peers, again, is something novel. But please be careful, right? Because things are censorship resistant means that market manipulation goes unchecked, right? These markets are heavily manipulated. And kind of going in just to chase returns can really, you know, be a bad thing. So my last point on bubbles is like that not all bubbles are created equal, right? So when the internet bubble popped, the people that were mostly affected were Silicon VCs that were chasing kind of unrealistic returns on, you know, unicorns like pets.com. When the real estate bubble popped, turns out a large portion of the Western economy relies on real estate, right? Most, well, not most, but like, again, a very, very, very large percentage of the population, kind of their main asset is their home, their mortgage, right? And so when a bubble pops that affects that many people, we feel the long-term implications of it, and we get pulled into these kind of big recessions that's, you know, thank 45, where, you know, he's got us out of that. That's a joke. But, you know, in a decentralized permissionless system, anyone in the world can participate. And this is all fun and great in a bull market when the bubble keeps expanding. But when the bubble pops, and, you know, today's kind of like a mini pop, but like when it really pops, you know, when these are like, when this is like $1 trillion or $5 trillion ecosystem and it seriously pops, the people that will suffer most critically are the most vulnerable investors, right? Because, you know, people in rural parts of this like poor rural parts of the world that are like going to start buying cryptocurrencies, right? They're the ones that will at least be able to afford the thing totally popping. I don't have a great answer for this one, right? If you have an answer for this one, you should speak at conferences. You should get your voice heard, because as it is right now, like, it's kind of inevitable. And so, like, if we could prevent the inevitable, that would be great. So Beyond. This is cute. That's a crypto kitty. Yeah, sorry. I've got a bunch. Mark gave me my first one. So what comes next? One of the things I love to hear is, what is the killer app for Bitcoin? People ask me that all the time, and I like shrug my shoulders. I don't know. Bitcoin is the killer app for Bitcoin. And what I love to say is that Bitcoin is the killer app for cryptography. We're seeing like this massive emergence of cryptography, right? So non-interactive zero-knowledge proofs, Shamir secret sharing, ring signatures, elliptic curve digital signature algorithms, and more. All of these are gaining tractions at levels we kind of never before imagined. And this is interesting, you know, go back to the cypherpunks, right? We're having more tools in our toolkit as individuals, right? And our networks are having more tools. So we can start to build things in ways that we had never considered building them before, because we have these new cryptographic primitives. And that's exciting. Like, that in and of itself, like, we can go home, like, and just like focus on the cryptography and try and like use it in new and meaningful ways. You know, but there's a lot of other things that are kind of trending in various directions, and like, I think I've said permissionless experimentation a couple of times in this talk. ConsenSys, we run a front-end API to the Ethereum network, and somewhere kind of like December 15th or so, we hit 4 billion transactions, or sorry, 4 billion API requests in one day. API request is different than transaction. turns out most blockchain code is really bad. And so, you'll pull like get latest block, on like a 50 millisecond loop. And it looks really great for our API adoption. So this is kind of fake news, but like the traction is up and to the right. And so, a lot of developers are moving into this ecosystem. I don't need to do the Steve Ballmer developers. Will also kind of the bubble will continue to expand, right? For better or for worse, this is going to continue. This is not my quote, but I tell this to my clients all the time. The World Economic Forum forecasts that by 2027, 10% of the global GDP will be on blockchain technology. And so I calculated that out once, and it means from now, every consecutive month from now until the end of 2027, the blockchain ecosystem needs to absorb $10 billion per month. Again, the World Economic Forum, like, so take it with a grain of salt, but I don't think we're gonna have less digital assets as time progresses, right? We're not gonna have less technology as time progresses, and so this is kind of, the bubble is gonna continue to expand. I'll wait for the photo. You got it? Cool. So what else is gonna happen? I think governments are gonna look for an edge. I just came back from Dubai. One of my favorite things to say on Twitter is that blockchains have geopolitical implications. Apparently North Korea is hoarding Bitcoins. And Vladimir Putin wants to create, a Russian ruble coin. And so, like, seriously, right? Because the censorship resistance thing, and because that many millions, hundreds of millions of hashes per second, these technologies can be very secure. They can be secure against nation-state actors. And so, places like Switzerland, the United Arab Emirates, Mauritius, Brazil, Singapore, definitely, they're making news by their blockchain pilots, and I think one use case that's pretty hot for cities and nation states is this concept of smart cities, right? Smart cities, if they're going to be smart, they have to speak in digital protocols. Guess what? Cryptocurrencies are digital protocols. A quick note about the SEC. The SEC is definitely paying attention to this ecosystem. And outright scams, like they're going after and they're prosecuting, which is great to see. I hear a lot of people say that the SEC is just going to like shut all of this down. And to those people, I say, have you ever been to New York City? Like, have you ever been to Wall Street? Like, the SEC exists to like, make markets more effective and protect consumers from scams, but they have already said that like Bitcoin is kind of here to stay, Ethereum is here to stay, and so you'll see more regulation and more frameworks emerge, but in the long run, that's probably good news for blockchain as a technology platform. So this is kind of one of my when not ifs that I like the most. Again, remember I was saying like tokens and the token market is kind of all like speculation on the future utility of those tech platforms that may or may not succeed. Well, it turns out New York City alone is estimated to have $1.57 trillion worth of real estate, which is 3 times as large as the entire blockchain cryptocurrency ecosystem. And so, like, once things like real estate become tokenized, I think it's going to change like the whole kind of narrative of tokens and digitization of assets and stuff like this. Like the idea of like click to buy, like if you've ever gotten a mortgage, if you've ever gone through like the bank and they give you an interest rate and you have to do the down payment, and like as a millennial, like that's a shitty experience, right? Like like I want click to buy, maybe not in New York. but also this idea of like instant liquidity for real estate markets, right? What if you could chop up the gallery into 1,000 different tokens, and then every time there was a meetup, I don't know, you got to be like a sponsor of that meetup. These things, I think, again, when, not if. There's a lot of regulatory stuff around it, but and so, finally, this kind of goes back to my first point, right? Remember Aaron, right? We're here to build an inclusive world. If you came to this talk just because you're chasing returns, sorry to disappoint. There's probably a talk in Wall Street that talks about investing. But there are 2 billion people in this world without access to financial services. This means our global economy only is less than 3/4 inclusive, right? There's over 1/4 of people on the planet that aren't included in the global economy. So permissionless systems are not a silver bullet. If you are not a technologist in this room, please engage with the technologists in this room. If we leave it to just the techies, we might have Facebook, decentralized Facebook all over again. We need to kind of like really empathize with problems and problem spaces and understand how solutions can actually solve real problems to kind of bring this global inclusion up. So the technology itself is not a silver bullet. But they provide an architecture that we've never had before. And I started my talk saying a lot of people in the blockchain ecosystem are optimistic, and because there's so much potential, right? A lot of blockchain developers talk about changing the world, right? And again, I'm sure a lot of .com developers talked about changing the world. So maybe it'll end up that way, but we have an opportunity, and so it's kind of on us to ensure that it's not a missed opportunity. So we've still got a lot of work to do, and that's it. That's my talk. So questions? Should I time box it? Just keep going. You'll tell me when to stop. She'll cut me off. All right. Sure. So the question is talking about the tokenization of real estate. Can we go a little bit deeper and kind of describe how that might shake out and what the tokens might do? So literally in the base case, right? The most primitive version of it is taking a lease, right, and putting it on a smart contract so that your monthly payment goes through a digital rails rather than through an ACH, right? And that's like the most base case. More interesting cases, right? If let's say you're a property developer and you need to raise funds for construction, for infrastructure of a new kind of build, right? The idea is, perhaps you can tokenize a part of, the equity of that building itself, a part of the future value of that building, and do a crowd sale, right? And chop up, 5% of that building into crowd sale tokens, and then give it to your investors. And when the building's done and you actually sell the units, 5% can flow back to those early investors. Those are some examples. I'm not saying that's what is going to happen. But how you would actually do that requires a lot of infrastructure to be built, right? So in today's world, real estate is paper-based, right? There's a lot of paper contracts, a lot of back and forth between lawyers and accountants and all this and banks and all this kind of stuff. So when I say infrastructure needs to be built, it's like from the beginning of that process, like from when, a piece of land has been surveyed to become a new building, and all those paper contracts involved in that need to kind of all be digitized along the way so you can maintain the provenance of that construction all the way to its digital form. So you kind of have that audit trail. At ConsenSys, we're working on a project that kind of really focuses on the provenance of various supply chain use cases to bring them all to a digitally native kind of setting, right? And it is a lot of consulting hours, capturing a lot of the business flows and trying to create new processes that are digitally native rather than analog first. And so, you know, it's gonna be a lot of work, but we are seeing examples of this. People kind of exploring, like if you search blockchain and real estate, there's a lot of jurisdictions that are exploring it. So like Cooks County in Illinois, Sweden, Mauritius wants to be a blockchain island, whatever that means. But you know, people are experimenting, and I would say we're like in very, very, very early innings of this adoption. Yeah, so that's a great question. He was talking about proof of work. Where'd the number go? Next one? Anyway. Okay, whatever. So the question was, when I was talking about hashing, and I was talking about that very, very large number of hashes per second to secure the network, why we didn't touch on proof of stake and kind of some of these new architectures that are being explored and being kind of researched right now. So just quick show of hands, who has heard of proof of stake? Okay, so one of the main criticisms of the proof of work scheme, you know, the Chinese miners all over the world, is that it's a massive use of electricity to kind of like an unfathomable scale. It's probably like the single largest human system that exists in terms of energy consumption, like the Bitcoin blockchain network. And so that doesn't scale super well for like the sake of humanity, right? Like you could imagine a planet that's just ASIC miners, just mining hashes for Bitcoin, and we live in spaceships. And so there are a lot of researchers out there that try and kind of think about how we can virtualize mining, how we can get rid of the electricity cost through algorithms that are just as secure. And so one of these ways is proof of stake. And the kind of intuition there is rather than mining with physical hardware, validators are kind of putting bonds. They're putting money where their mouth is, and they are validating the transactions as they come in. And if they cheat, you know, their bonds get slashed, and then it kind of gets distributed to you know, the other miners or the other validators. And so, not to like sound super dramatic, and I drink a lot of the blockchain Kool-Aid, so this might, you know, feel free to roll your eyes. But if proof of stake works in a meaningful way, I think it's like an invention that like levels up society, like levels up our civilization, right? Like if it works the way that we intend it to work, that we hope it works, it's like one of these on the level of the Gutenberg press, I think, because it enables these things to scale. All of a sudden, once people are convinced it works, like you'll see nation states kind of stake their paper currencies to their digital value. You know, they'll dematerialize the paper currencies, and the nation state blockchains will like proliferate, and you know, we'll have this like new layer of global kind of decentralized systems. There are critics of proof of stake. There are proof of work purists, maximalists. You know, currently the proof of work guys are winning because they have a working solution, and the proof of stake team is still in research mode. But you know, a lot of us are optimistic that the transition to proof of stake will happen, and it will be, you know, it will be a solution that's kind of acceptable for what we're trying to do. Yeah. So the question is like about mining. And you know, it's given that the miners are validating transactions, but what are kind of the mechanisms of mining? Like how is it determined? How is the difficulty determined? And so okay, so the invariant in Bitcoin is that blocks are 10 minutes, right? This is the number Satoshi said. It's like, I want blocks every 10 minutes. And in the base case, he set the difficulty such that his laptop, Satoshi's laptop, would solve the puzzle every 10 minutes. And then people joined the networks and they started using their laptops, and now it kind of trended faster, like say 7 minutes. And because it says 10 minutes in the protocol, the protocol itself can self-adjust and say, oh, people are mining this faster than every 10 minutes, so that must mean that there's more hash power and that the current difficulty is too easy. So the protocol actually self-adjusts, and it makes it harder. It retargets the puzzle, the proof of work, such that it just goes up, and then all of those nodes will be like, oh shit, it got harder, and it goes back to 10 minutes. And if it goes too high and it takes 13 minutes, the protocol will readjust back down to 10 minutes. And so Andreas Antonopoulos has this like really great metaphor. It's on YouTube. He thinks of it as like a Sudoku puzzle, 9 by 9. And I take 10 minutes to do a Sudoku puzzle. So you give me one and I sit there and then I do it in 10 minutes and I show you, it's like, hey, my Sudoku puzzle's done. And then you give me a new one and we keep doing that. But then Mike comes in and he can do it faster than I can. So now the Sudoku puzzles are being solved in every 7 minutes. And so the next time the person that's giving Sudoku puzzles, instead of 9 by 9, they'll make it 10 by 10, right? And so 10 by 10 Sudoku puzzles are exponentially, well not exponentially, but they're harder than 9 by 9 Sudoku puzzles, right? And so, okay, now Mark joins, and the three of us, one of us can kind of solve them faster and faster, and then as more and more people come in, the puzzles gets harder and harder and harder. Like you just add more difficulty to it. Should it ever get implemented? So I think, I laugh at that. I think that is like, it's like, yeah, and so I'm not a sidechain expert. Yeah, these things are interesting and compelling, but then like it turns out actually implementing them in a meaningful, robust way, fault-tolerant way, it's like easy to write the white paper, but it's actually hard to actually implement it. And listen, like RSK, they were talking about it in 2012, right? And it's still not kind of live. And so, is it a risk? I mean, maybe, like Darwinian landscape, right? Like everything's a risk, everything's out to eat every other protocol. Am I losing sleep over RSK personally? Not really. There is a failure mode for Bitcoin if RSK works really, really, really well. That all the Bitcoins kind of flow into RSK, and then that becomes the new kind of global standard. But I'm not holding my breath. Right. So a lot there in the question. So, and I'm paraphrasing, but when will kind of sharing economy use cases kind of see the main stage, right? Like when will people start to actually implement solutions on top of these? I think there's a very, very large user experience problem in all of cryptocurrency, all of blockchain technology, is that people don't, like grandma doesn't know what a private key is, right? And she'll never know. And so, that's a UX challenge that kind of is a bottleneck for adoption globally that we need to solve for. But I think people are working on solutions every day. I think there's how many developers in the Ethereum ecosystem? 40,000 plus, growing every single day. And so people are exploring use cases. People are exploring how this technology is going to be meaningful. Again, it's still early days. Like the price is like this weird thing that is not really coupled to like the stuff on the ground, but the stuff on the ground is innovative and it's new. But to your point about market equilibrium and stuff like that, that is like a pretty valid criticism about these technologies. Is the initial distribution mechanisms of things like Bitcoin and Ethereum and so on are very, very skewed to the early adopters, right? So, there is a failure scenario whereby like Roger Ver ends up being the overlord of everyone on the planet Earth because, Bitcoin becomes worth, $100 trillion and he's got 50% of it or whatever. and like doesn't ever have to release them, right? And so that is kind of like this weird failure scenario where you know, the distribution kind of is skewed towards tech early adopters, and sociologists have been talking about the digital divide for the past 30 years, right? So it's like a real thing, the digital divide, and so like the people on the side of the digital divide that don't have access to technology are gonna like, well, they can't. How are they gonna get the bitcoins, and how are they gonna get the ether, right? Like they don't have the skill sets, and so you know, I like narrowing the digital divide is like one of the missions that like we really have to focus on, because like everyone needs to be able to be armed with this technology. Yeah. So the question is like. You know, centralized systems are often more efficient and better at throughput and stuff. So why decentralized architectures? Why are they superior? And you know, Mark and I have been doing consulting in blockchain for years, and oftentimes we tell our clients like, no, your centralized system is actually the better approach. Like you don't need a blockchain for this. One example I do point to is like Target. You know, Target's the easy company to pick on because they had a data breach and hundreds of millions of people's PII is hacked and revealed. I've been shopping on Overstock.com for a while, and I pay with Bitcoin, although you know I regret it now. I think yeah, we don't need to talk about how much Bitcoin I've spent on Overstock, but like it's a cool experience because I don't have to put in my credit card information, right? Like I just send Bitcoin and they don't have that PII. So if Overstock gets hacked, like my personal information is not at risk, right? And so it's the reason decentralized systems are important is because it gives sovereignty back to the users. It lets the users hold on to their data and lets them selectively choose which parts of their data they want to give to these companies, right? And so like, you know, is it less efficient? Like, yeah, sure, it is, but it's a trade-off, right? So, last question. I have spent zero time studying the graph coins. So the question is, do the graph coins have chances of being competitors? You know, I don't know if you guys experience this, but it's like coin fatigue, right? It's like there's so many of these things that like the white papers are kind of interesting, but then like, you know, it becomes like a full-time job, and then like I have a full-time job, and so I don't necessarily know much about those particular technologies, and I wish I did because I do like talking about new innovative technologies, but I've been around this ecosystem long enough to know that like things that people hate on can like easily become the lead, right? Like people kind of one of the like super weird things about this blockchain ecosystem, skin in the game token thing is like we have this like new form of tribalism where like my tribe is better than your tribe, and like, you know, because like you suck, right? And like and it's like weird, and like people hate on each other for just because like I missed owning your coin that just went up 1,000%, so obviously you're a scam, right? And so like these like tribes, it's kind of like flush out the noise. Like we're all in the same boat, right? It's like Coca-Cola's biggest competitor isn't Pepsi, it's water, right? Our biggest competitor isn't like the other shitcoin, it's like the legacy system. And so, you know, it's like just kind of like put my head down and kind of like build. Beer? One more? Right, so the question is like, try and kind of paint a picture of what society looks like if this technology is adopted at scale, right? It's an interesting question because, you know, one of the cool things about blockchain technology is it like pick like philosophy or economics or computer science, and like all these topics, and they all kind of sort of blend in into this technology. And so part of my answer is I guess like a little, it depends on like your economic school of thought, right? There's a lot of the early blockchain Bitcoin adopters were like libertarians, like, and the libertarian is like the smartest person in the room until they keep talking kind of thing. It's like, that's a joke. I like libertarians, some of them. And so like some people say, monetary theory and kind of governments trying to control the economy leads to nothing but, bursts of bubbles, and, there's misery, and then we have to have like a global world war to like pull us out of, the kind of not letting the market just like resolve its own equilibrium. And so there are some proponents of blockchain technology that say like if this thing is adopted and like it removes the ability for governments to actually like influence interest rates and like move the needle, that like the market will go through like, sorry? No, like they won't have the facility to, right? Because like right now the federal government can print as much paper money as they want, but there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin in the history of Bitcoin, unless there's a hard fork that changes that number. But and so like how does society look if this is fully adopted? Like I don't know, because I don't know like which path is the path that gets fully adopted, right? There are paths, that are like the libertarian ideologies, right, where it's like the 21 million Bitcoin is like the one currency for the whole world, right? And Roger Ver is kind of our overlord. And the free market reaches equilibrium, and like we don't need monetary policy anymore because we live in this idealistic utopia. If you believe that, like, okay, cool. I mean, I don't know that we're gonna get there so easily. What I do know is like there is like a history of our institutions and like all of human history that creates like massive infighting and bubbles and misery and war, and the world is a very, very abundant place, right? Today in this planet we have enough abundance to feed every single person on the planet and send every single person to school and put shelter over every single person's head. And so the fact that we don't is a choice, right? And that's like a fucked up choice. So if we can like fix that in a meaningful way, if we could get to like the better result, then like, I think that's something worth kind of building towards.
Great job. And you will be sticking around afterwards for more questions if you couldn't get to it. Sorry to cut it off. I know it's getting hot in here. No. And so one of the things that I would just let you guys know, we only have 2 elevators. So if you guys want to network for a little bit and hang out and let people kind of leave in pieces, that's just, I let you guys self-coordinate. But yes. Oh, one more thing.
Yeah. So I have ConsenSys colleagues and blockchain colleagues here. So like you can ask them questions too, and they'll also. Yeah, ConsenSys people, raise your hand. Okay. Yeah, back there too, back there.
Awesome. And then again, just reminder about the survey. We sent it out, so please fill it out if you want to hear something special. The cards that I promised are up here. And have a great night. Looking forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Thank you.